Hi, everybody. Good morning, actually more good afternoon, and good evening for those joining us from around the world. This press conference is organized by the Hands of Mother Earth Alliance, or HOME, an international civil society network which is a driving force in the fight against geoengineering and technofixes. And my organization, the Heinrich Böll Foundation, is a proud member of the HOME Alliance. We are here today because geoengineering, which is the large-scale scheme to manipulate the Earth's oceans, lands, and atmosphere, is being used to divert attention away from addressing the root causes of climate change. They are dangerous distractions from the systemic changes that we need and which we need fast. Geoengineering and technofixes are a threat to our indigenous people, climate and biodiversity, and communities and their human rights around the world. We are seeing, and our panelists here today will elaborate on this, how geoengineering and its promises and promoters, are trying to expand their foothold in this space here in the UNFCCC and the negotiations. For instance, under Article 6 on market mechanism, but also in other UN spaces like the UN Environment Assembly, in spite of the fact that the Convention on Biological Diversity has a moratorium against deployment of geoengineering. We are also witnessing a growing number of outdoor geoengineering experiments and large financing commitments propping up such technofixes, and I just want to mention here the United States and the Inflation Reduction Act, all in defiance of international agreements. Thus, the HOME Alliance and its member group want to call attention to this problem, and this is why we are here today. We are joined today by 4 speakers who will speak on the topic, and in the interest of time, I start us off with our first speaker sitting here on my left and your right, Silvia Ribera from the ETC group in Mexico, who will speak about geoengineering at the UNFCCC and here at the SB60 negotiations. Please, Silvia.
Thank you, Leanne. Good morning, everyone. Well, geoengineering, as you may know, is a set of technological proposals to manipulate the climate, either to absorb carbon for the atmosphere once it was emitted, or to reflect back radiation from the sun in an attempt to lower temperature. It is very important for you all to know that these technologies, none of them are proven. They are not even clear that they will really be effective in sucking carbon, and much less that the carbon will be permanently stored somewhere. So there is not assurance for this. Still, there is this set of proposals that are being considered here at the UNFCCC in different tracks of negotiation. The main track just now is the Article 6 through carbon markets. And it's very concerning that Article 6, and particularly Article 6.4 on new market mechanism, is considered as removals, a set of different technologies, particularly marine geoengineering technologies, that pretend to either fertilize the ocean artificially or to have large-scale plantations of algae or seaweeds and different things, and even sink them. First plant large surface with them, and then gather them and sink them, or sink other kind of biomass, or mess with the chemistry of the ocean, because the ocean is very acidified because of the excess carbon dioxide that it has absorbed. And the proposal is to try to add different kind of chemicals or rock dust to try to make it more alkaline. All these technologies are not proven at all, but they are being sold here as sources for carbon credits, which is really not only a dangerous destruction, it will also have a lot of concrete impacts on the systems, on the ecosystems of the sea, for instance, increasing shadow, a lot of impacts on the bottom of the sea that is very poorly known, but also disrupt the marine food chain and a lot of other things. And upon that, it's not even sure that they will keep the carbon. So this is tantamount of fraud. Proposing these kind of technologies that are not proven, not ready, and also that will have a lot of impacts. So our concern of this is that there are also other parts of the UN, like the Convention on Biological Diversity or the London Convention Against Ocean Dumping, that has issued precautionary calls on this technology, asking all the parties to not release any of these technologies, while here they are being considered to be accepted as part of a market mechanism. So we are very concerned about this and ask all the parties to really not approve any kind of removals based on geoengineering. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. And as you mentioned, the UNFCCC is unfortunately not the only space where we see those technofix technologies and approaches cropping up. And our next speaker, Nicholas Hallström from What's Next, will speak about geoengineering actually coming on in a lot of the other UN spaces and why we need to be aware and caution against this. Please.
Thank you. Yes, a lot of these conversations and attempts to move and normalize the discourse around geoengineering is happening in other spaces. There are some options to move in a good precautionary way to safeguard and stop these things, but there's also definite attempts to try to move into these spaces, this discourse around geoengineering as a viable option. And one recent example was United Nations Environment Assembly, which happened in Nairobi a few months ago, earlier this year, where a resolution was tabled around solar geoengineering, one kind of geoengineering, the probably most horrible and most dangerous prospect, basically dimming the sun with stratospheric aerosol injection, spraying particles for generations, hundreds of years, even more possibly, to dim the sun with incredible risks. You know, monsoons might flip, we might have to continue forever because if you stop, particles fall to the ground and you get a termination shock. It's basically impossible to govern. How do you keep such a system in place when we can't even agree to use bicycles in this space? This resolution was really framed as a way to kind of, let's look at this. There's benefits as well. Developing countries most at risk might have most to benefit. Let's have an expert kind of panel commission to look at this in this kind of seemingly neutral way, but actually very dangerous because it normalizes this as a possible option. Africa, particularly with the help of other countries, Pakistan, Mexico, Colombia, Pacific Islands, joined with Africa in saying, no, this is wrong. This is not the framing. We shouldn't talk about this as an option. This is about introducing pollution, multi-generational, massive pollution schemes to stop another kind of pollution, what's causing climate change. That's not a reasonable way. If we're going to talk about this in UNEA, the environment program, it has to be as a new pollution threat, and we need to apply the precautionary principle. And hence, we really need to get another kind of international agreement, a non-use agreement, that basically says, reject. This is like eugenics, human cloning, chemical weapons. We just have to decide that agree that this is too dangerous, and let's be clear on this, and then not allow patents, outdoor experimentation, public funding to normalize the technology development, because once it's developed, it's likely to be used. And this was a tremendous shift in this UN space, where Africa with other developing countries turned the whole thing around and insisted on this framing, which led to the resolution collapsing and being withdrawn, which was a good thing, because it could only have been a bad result otherwise. This new international, the call for a new international non-use agreement on solar geoengineering, it's happening as we speak. There's tremendous effort and momentum to build this. 500 scientists, countries starting to join in, and we can see the emergence of a regime that can really be what we need. This is reinforcing other spaces where there is a battle, but there's also some good grounds. We have the Convention on Biological Diversity, which has a moratorium since over a decade. And in recent discussions on marine and coastal diversity, just now in Nairobi, there's been an emphasis to also affirm this. It's a very significant existing international agreement around geoengineering. We also have the London Convention, another UN convention, that is about protection of marine pollution, dumping of wastes, etc., which of course looks to the ocean kinds of geoengineering technologies, but very clearly say these sets of technologies, there's an annex, it's growing, these are out of bounds, these are not acceptable, these are banned. So these are spaces that exist, which we need to guard and strengthen and build on, and ultimately get to things like this non-use agreement, which is even more kind of, say, ambitious. And lastly, just to mention, there's tremendous human rights implications, obviously. So the Human Rights Council has come with very useful reports, recognizing how this could seriously interfere with the enjoyment of human rights for millions and perhaps billions of people, and hence has to be elevated also in that space. So I'll end there. That's just a little map of where these conversations are happening. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Niklas, and thank you also for particularly showcasing some of the efforts in the pushback efforts and institutions and approaches against the normalizing of those techno-fixes. Our next speaker is Mary George from CIEL, the Center for International Environmental Law. She will talk about geoengineering experiments taking place across the globe, do kind of a quick mapping, and particularly also show us some recent wins. Mary, please.
Thank you. So we are really very deeply concerned about the proliferation of outdoor, so open air and open water geoengineering experiments that are either taking place or have been announced in recent months and the last year or two. We're seeing experiments go ahead across a wide range of theories and technologies, including solar radiation modification, marine carbon dioxide removal, and Arctic ice management. And while these methods, as other speakers have said, vary considerably, what they have in common is scale. So in order to have any possibility of their intended impact on the global climate, what is ultimately being proposed is interventions in Earth systems at a truly enormous scale. So some initial tests may appear small scale. So for example, the experiment by the Marine Cloud Brightening Project, which is dealing with a form of solar radiation modification that involves spraying saltwater particles into the air to thicken or brighten clouds, theoretically increasing their reflectivity and thereby partially blocking the sun's rays. This small-scale experiment in Alameda, San Francisco, that was halted only last week, but a similar project previously planned to move from a very similar small-scale test as an initial phase of an experiment to experimenting in an area of over 10,000 square kilometers within a matter of 5 years. Experiments are currently underway, for example, in Mexico and the UK to develop seaweed farming, a kind of seaweed farming which combines biomass sinking with artificial upwelling, which is about pumping deep ocean water, nutrient-rich deep ocean water to the surface as a kind of feedstock for the farm. And so experiments already underway at a reasonably small scale, but they're intended to scale up to 100 farms in the Caribbean by 2030. This is just one company alone. And planning to start from only 2 years from now, a mega farm of 95,000 square kilometers in the South Atlantic. Then we have ocean alkalinity enhancement, where materials such as limestone, olivine, or brucite are poured into the open ocean to increase alkalinity and, in theory, encourage the ocean to absorb more CO2. And that is being proposed, in order to have any meaningful climate impact, that is being proposed at a scale that would cover approximately 10% of the ocean's surface. And of course, the associated infrastructure and transportation of these very highly speculative industries of the future are also huge. And in the case of ocean alkalinity enhancement, you're also looking at the associated mining with, of course, all the knock-on human rights, social, environmental, and carbon impacts of that. And as other speakers have touched on, what many of these projects have in common is a commercial aspect, which of course is a very significant factor in the prohibition under the Convention on Biological Diversity and the drive for more restrictive regulation at the London Convention, London Protocol. So, and this is very clearly being driven by the voluntary carbon market sector which of course Article 6 negotiations are serving to legitimize. And we're even seeing the emergence of so-called cooling credits based on the idea of stratospheric aerosol injection, with a Californian startup marketing these as they release balloons of sulfur compounds into the atmosphere. And likewise, companies are looking to commercialize ice thickening projects in the Arctic on the basis of cooling credits. Whether or not they have a commercial element, outdoor experiments tend to serve as technology development, which of course is a clear red line for many with these highly controversial methods. And of course, they all serve to normalize it. Israeli venture capital-backed startup called Stardust, for example, plans to conduct outdoor stratospheric aerosol injection experiments this year in a project that looks clearly geared towards technology development in anticipation of future government contracts for deployment, according to its CEO. So that is the alarming reality that we are dealing with, and that is why we have to resist these experiments on the ground and hold governments to the international agreements that restrict and prohibit geoengineering. And we have seen some important wins on this front recently, with Alameda City Council voting unanimously to reject the Marine Cloud Brightening project, the cancellation of the flagship Harvard SCOPEX stratospheric aerosol injection trial, and with Planetary Technologies announcing this year that their planned ocean alkalinity enhancement experiment in Cornwall will not go ahead this year, following strong community resistance and the exposure of deep flaws in their plan. So geoengineering is fundamentally a full solution to the climate crisis. Remember, none of these theories do anything to tackle the root causes of the climate crisis. Instead, they serve to delay vital action to phase out fossil fuels. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Mary, particularly also showcasing the commercial interests behind it and the scaling up from small pilots to large commercial, including operations that continue the potential for human rights violations and resource extraction that is actually part of what brought us to the crisis in the first place. With this, we come to our final speaker, who is Panyana Pungovi from the Indigenous Environmental Network, and she will talk about the impacts of these and future experiments on lands and communities. Please.
Wanga atka bangangang naka bangawi, wanga ataka ganaterma naka Kirsten Nugakpas, wanga sivungami. I come from St. Lawrence Island, and St. Lawrence Island is in the Bering Strait, and this is one of two thoroughways to the Arctic, and so all of the pollutants of the world actually travel through the currents, through the Bering Strait and the Fram Strait, which makes us some of the most polluted people in the world. We're also polluted because there was a military base built on our island, and at the very end, the troops on the island were told to take their backpacks, cut the lines, and leave. And this meant that they spilt heavy metals and fuel all over our tundra, which seeped into our ecosystem, and we're still suffering from cancers and other pollutants today. So what we have learned is through history, things have been done to us by others for the good of others, or from what they perceive to be the good of all. We serve as the dumping ground and the stepping stool of Western science and Western civilization. And this relationship imbalance is what has caused climate chaos that we see today. Apart from the debate about these technologies that simply tries to focus on the pros and cons of the technologies, each of these has several common underlying themes. They are billionaire and fossil fuel backed, they are theoretical and risky, and they will cost enormous amounts of resources and would require multi-decade or multi-century international agreements. They require the continued use of indigenous lands and waters as sacrifice zones, as we see in the resource development that have gotten us into the climate chaos that we see today. Already these technologies are being tested on us without our free, prior, and informed consent. As an Indigenous person deeply connected to the land, I must emphasize the peril of excluding Indigenous perspectives when devising solutions to address climate change. Our close relationship with the ecosystems being experimented on is integral to our understanding of their intricate balance and delicate harmony. Those conducting these experiments often lack familiarity with our ecosystems, and their methods and testings and also their inquiry falls short of comprehensiveness. For instance, there was a geoengineering experiment done in Nome, Alaska, where they placed water pumps that would suck water from underneath ice structures and spill it over the top to thicken the ice. And a simple conversation with my uncles show that blue cod lay their eggs underneath the ice, and so this would disrupt the life cycle of blue cod as well as the algae that grows underneath the ice. The ice is a living structure, and it depends on a freeze-melt cycle in order for us to be safe while we're walking on the ice, which is an integral part of our cultural lifestyle. Their questions are often one-dimensional, failing to consider the necessity for nature to have the time to adapt to a rapidly changing climate. Further human intervention through geoengineering would disrupt the natural adaptive processes of these ecosystems. The urgency of the climate crisis demands that we consider the long-term consequences of our actions. It is essential to recognize that the wisdom embedded in Indigenous knowledge systems is rooted in the deep observation and understanding of our environment over generations. Our traditional Indigenous knowledge offers insight into the resilience and adaptability of ecosystems, emphasizing the need for cautious and a holistic approach to environmental stewardship. We are in a climate chaos situation because of a flawed valued system that allows for the sacrifice of many and the supposed benefit of a few. Geoengineering in concept continues that practice. Resource development and geoengineering are both forms of commodifications of nature and wrongly views humans as separate from nature. Our communities, intimately tied to the land and water, bear witness to the interconnectedness of all life and the necessity of preserving the integrity of our ecosystems. In light of these considerations, it is imperative that decision makers and researchers engage in genuine dialogue with Indigenous peoples, recognizing the invaluable wisdom we possess. Our voices hold the key to a more comprehensive understanding of the complex web of relationships within ecosystems and the consequences of large-scale interventions. In addition to the above, because we live in a world that overlooks the rights of Indigenous peoples, we have already seen projects ignore free, prior, and informed consent ethics, as we do see a drastic increase of missing and murdered Indigenous relatives with any large-scale project deployed on or near Indigenous territories. Geoengineering testing has occurred almost exclusively in Indigenous territories, violating our rights and overlooking our right to free, prior, and informed consent. We will be the first to experience the health hazards, the ecosystem disruption, and the violence, just as we have with the pollution that caused the climate crisis. This is an issue of rights and the relationship between Indigenous and Western value systems. So often we are told that our right to consent are superseded by what these so-called scientists view as the global benefit of these concepts. Geoengineering technologies and carbon markets are a form of green colonialism, which continues the land and ocean grab that has begun since colonization. These concepts separate Indigenous peoples from the lands, waters, and air, from the very ecosystems we are a part of. Our interaction and direct relationship with these ecosystems is what has protected them. Over 80% of what is left, at least, of Earth's biodiversity. Removing our voices and our relationship is not only disrespectful and in violation of the sacred, but it is also dangerous to the very ecosystems that we want to protect.
Thank you so much. We unfortunately only have a couple of minutes left, but I want to open it now up for questions, and we see them as a starting point. We certainly can follow up with the panelists and outside of the room. Please raise your hand, introduce yourself and your organization when you are asking your question. And I saw a first hand here.
Okay.
And can I see any others just to get any, maybe we take 2 or 3 if there are more questions, and then have one round of answer. So 1, 2, any others? So we'll go with those 2, and then again there is an opportunity to speak with the panelists outside, please.
Okay, I'm Helga. I'm from Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, but my question is concerned around water, and I would like to have your opinion if that is also geoengineering. There is a right to water, but at the moment, more and more countries are producing water via desalination plants. These desalination plants let out back into the sea all kinds of particles and salt, so they are destroying the ecosystem. And As an example, NEOM in Saudi Arabia has already driven away indigenes.
Thank you. And if you can pass the microphone to the second speaker who has, second person who has raised your hand, really briefly, please. And then we did do a short answer and we start from Panyana, go the other way around. But please, short answers. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. Oktay Az from Azerbaijan think tank. I have a question that we know that naturally we can only recover more than half of the CO2 emissions, and the renewable energy sources are not stable and not sustainable for today. And why do you consider that so much regulations and restriction on carbon capture and storage systems are important for now, or we need to force the technology development and accelerate this process?
Great, and I think the speakers here on the panel have heard the questions. Panyana, we'll start with you, and just really a quick answer, if there is anything that you want to answer to those two questions, and then we pass it on. Okay. Sylvia? Yeah.
Well, on the water on the question of desalinization is not considered geoengineering. It's probably causing other problems, but is not considered geoengineering at this point. On the other question is that over 85% of the carbon capture and storage facilities are for enhanced oil recovery. That is to produce more oil. So carbon capture and storage is the typical example of geoengineering. It is not addressing anything, not even capturing carbon. It is producing more carbon, more greenhouse gas emissions. So this is not about regulating this. It's about it should be banned, really, because it's worsening the climate crisis instead of making any kind of solution about it.
Great. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Thanks for joining us today. Our experts will be available outside to speak with you. The live stream of the press conference will be available on the UNFCCC website, and our press release will be shared shortly. Thanks very much, and again, our experts are outside available to speak with you. Thank you.